Fabulous. Amazing. We are extremely, I've said it many times, but I will say it again because it's just incredibly true. We are incredibly privileged to be joined this evening by NG Peltier and Sandra Aagaard. And I am now going to introduce Sandra Aagaard and read out Sandra Aagaard's bio. Sandra A. Aagaard has been a professional storyteller, writer, book doctor, cultural historian, and literary consultant for over 40 years. She has performed and taught at venues and educational organizations across the UK and internationally. She has written numerous plays, poems, short stories, and has had work published in a variety of collections and anthologies. In October 2019, she published her first children's book entitled Trailblazers, Harriet Tubman, A Journey to Freedom by Stripes Publishing. Sandra has published several other titles. These are The Bristol Bus Boycott, A Fight for Racial Justice, Amazing Women in Black History, To the Moon and Back, The Story of Katherine Johnson, The Lion Keeper. She has also co-edited with Layla Sumpton, Where We Find Ourselves, Poems and Stories of Maps and Mapping. In April, her latest book will be published. It is entitled The Drum Maker and the Aziza, a retelling of the Elves and the Shoemaker. In 2022, Sandra was elected an honorary fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Sandra was also the recipient of the Benson Medal for Services to Literature. Sandra is currently a learning facilitator for schools at the British Library. Wow. I believe that Sandra is here. Fabulous. Can we please give a huge Caribbean Links warm welcome to Sandra Aagaard.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. That's very kind of you. Brilliant. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Sandra A. Aagaard. The A stands for Annie. I was named after my grandmother, my father's mum. And yes, and I'm delighted to be here today with you. As the introduction has said, I've been in literature for many, many years, many moons. It's all started probably at home with my family, telling stories to my two younger sisters, Linda and Brenda Aagaard. My dad was the reader of the family. He would read stories to us, but my mum, Evelyn Aagaard, my dad's sister Aagaard, mum would tell us stories, stories of home. I was born in London, Hackney, London, and my parents hail from Guyana. So we heard of home daily. I heard of home all the time, what Guyana was like, what it was like growing up with my mum in Georgetown on the Seawall, my father in Essequibo, and it was delight. And this just fueled my imagination of what the Caribbean, what Guyana was like. And as a storyteller, my imagination would just run riot. And I remember being about 7 or 8, and our teacher asked us at school to, all those children born abroad, can you tell us something about their childhood? And I, bold-faced, went up to the front and stood in front of Miss Evans and the class and started to reel off Guyana. I had not been to Guyana at 8. I didn't go until I was an adult. But because I'd heard about home and I could, I knew all the stories, I just, talked about the clothes you'd wear, the earrings you'd wear, because our grandmothers used to send us boxes with all kinds of stuff, cassava jams and sugar cake, and it was such a delight. And the earrings and the clothes that were always too small, but was so beautifully handmade. And so I was able to reel off this whole thing about Guyana. And I think Miss Evans knew I'd been born in Hackney Hospital, but I was a storyteller and she let me tell my story. But I always remember my best friend, Pauline, still my best friend to this day. She's was in the same class then. And she whispered, "I'm gonna tell your mother." Never forget that. That was, And so my storytelling began, as I said, as a child, and it just evolved at school. I was always lucky to be encouraged by my parents, my family, and also had some really, really good people around me at school to encourage me to write and to read. I loved reading books. Books were my passion and still are. I'm a great bookworm. I love books. I love books a lot. And I've worked in libraries for a very long time. So that just added to it. Yeah, books, library books. And now I got a job very early on, a Saturday job when Saturday jobs were going. It was Marks and Spencer's and a library. Nobody wanted to work in a library, but unfortunately, my father said, "No, you're taking the library job." Didn't want to turn down Marks and Spencer's, but I had to because that was a place to work. Marks and Spencer's was bee's knees. Who worked in a library? I was already known as a swot at school. That was the cherry on the cake, you know, the icing, everything, that I was working in the library because nobody else did. I was the only one. Everybody worked Marks and Spencer's, British Home Stores, you know, those are the places. But my dad knew best, and 40-something years later, I'm still in libraries. I'm now, as was said in the bio, I'm now at the British Library. Yeah, so libraries have always been my blood, books, words of some kind. I've been privileged to help a lot of some people along the way realise their own dream of becoming a writer and a reader and a storyteller, and I've helped in any way I can. And throughout, I've always been writing plays, poetry, short stories. It was at a place called Centerprise in London, in Hackney, a lovely community bookshop in Hackney, sadly no longer with us. That helped. That was my first professionally published work in a book called Talking Blues that came out of a workshop, an after schools workshop, creative writing. I was the only girl, and that's why there was a lot of boys there. There's about maybe 8 of us to 10. And I was the only girl at the time. So that's interesting that, you know, but all these boys were writing poetry and stories. So it was very interesting back then. And we had a lot of Talking Blues really opened up a lot of doors for us. The book went everywhere and it was very exciting. Yeah, so yeah, I could go on. Do you want me to stop? Because I could go on and on and on. I know we're going to answer more questions later on. And yeah, it was just a very exciting time growing up and being introduced to writers like J. California Cooper, Audre Lorde, Camilla Brathwaite. Saw the early days of Linda Kwesi Johnson. I remember coming down and doing us a reading with us, and him reading from Deadbeat and Blunt, and it was very exciting, and yeah, it was great times. Those times, I remember meeting Chinua Achebe, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker. For us as young writers at that time, to be exposed to such great writers was wonderful. And at one point, a teacher from school took myself and another rising poet at the time, Hugh Boatswain, to New Beacon Books in Strike Green Road. And this was before they had the shop, when the New Beacon Books was in the front room of John LaRose's house and Sarah White's house. So it was in their front room that the house was there. So the bookshop was in their front room of their house. And I remember John LaRose being so supportive and encouraging of us as young writers. And yeah, and so much so that we took part in the first Black Book Fair in Camden. Myself and Hugh, we were on the bill as young writers, and we were able to see people like Mikey Smith, whose presentation, when he gave his I Can't Believe It poem performance, was just outstanding. So we were exposed to writers from the Caribbean, we were exposed to writers from Africa and America. And it was really exciting, us as young writers doing that. We loved it so much. But all the time I was working in libraries and Islington Libraries it was. And I didn't think I would, once I'd left to go to university, I didn't think I would go back, but I did. I got a job in another, not as a library assistant, but more specialised, working in establishing libraries for community groups, because we had a number of community groups. We're talking about the mid-80s. We had a number of community groups around the borough, and my job was to establish their own personal libraries for them, because my speciality was Caribbean and African literature, and the rising Black literature scene. So it was my job to establish books for them. And so we would go to places like New Beacon, in Finchley Park, Head Start, Centerprise. We had the libraries at that time had a really good link with the community bookshops, and we would get the books hot off the press from the Caribbean, Africa, America, wherever, and establish libraries within the libraries themselves, in the public libraries, and also with community libraries, their own personal libraries. It was a great, exciting time then. And there was such the scene, the culture scene, because it was not only literature, there was art, there was film, there was theatre, there was photography. My own sister, Brenda Agard, sadly no longer with us. She left us in 2012. Was a fantastic poet and photographer, and she established, she had many links with, like for example, the Black Art Gallery, which was at Finsbury Park, and so we worked there. It was just such an exciting theme. My sister Linda Agard was a dancer, and so dance was part of our scene as well. So it was just exciting and wonderful, and there was always something to do every evening. We went out and we had lots of fun, and all the time we were establishing ourselves as Black artists, and yeah, it was very exciting. But all the time I was writing poetry in the main. I was writing poetry, and the telling stories was a sideline. But then when I became the storyteller that I think people know more of me, rather than the writer. When people kept asking me to tell a story at an event, and so I started to tell stories, and it became more and more. I'd worked a lot in schools, telling people stories, and establishing the need to tell stories, to foster and to cultivate and maintain this legacy of our oral tradition in storytelling. And we are more than the Anansi stories. We're so much more than that. And I thought that was very important. And also to establish our own family stories, our own family histories. I was very interested in that. And yeah, it was just very exciting, and I loved it. Yeah. I'm going to stop talking now.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Sandra. Can we please give a huge clap to Sandra A. Agard for her time this afternoon and for her wonderful speech? Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandra, for that. I am now going to read out the bio for the amazing Ng Peltier, who hails from Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm going to read out her bio. Ng Peltier is an anime watching, book reading, video game playing, story writing kind of girl. A devourer of words and books from a young age, she enjoys writing romance and creeping people out with the Caribbean folklore stories she grew up hearing. A Trinidadian born and raised, she currently lives in Trinidad with her mountain of ideas and characters battling each other for whose story gets told next. Love that. Can we please give a huge, warm Caribbean Links welcome to Angie Peltier.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. As Afia said, I am Angie Peltier and I am from Trinidad. I recently published my Island Bite series. So Sweet Han, which is the first book, came out in 2021, and then followed by Don't Go Breaking My Heart, which is book 2, which came out last year around June. So just like Sandra would have mentioned about herself, I've always loved reading, and my father was actually the bookworm in the family as well. So clearly I got that from him. So from a young age, I used to devour these, I don't know what the actual series is called, but they were like little square books that had the stories of like David Copperfield, Huckleberry Finn, Oliver Twist, those kind of stories. I also started reading the classics like Black Beauty, and then got into Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys. And then one day I was at my grandmother's house and I found this very tattered, literally falling apart. The cover was barely hanging on, Mills and Boon's book. I was like, okay, what is this? I probably wasn't even supposed to be reading it at that age, right? I don't even think I was a teenager yet at that point. But I mean, nobody was telling me not to read it. Nobody was stopping me from reading it. So I took the book and I read it and I was like, okay, interesting. So that's kind of how I got into the whole romance community. And then when I, actively tried to get published and I came online, I submitted my stuff in a Twitter pitch competition. And through that, I actually got my agent. So from there, we tried to get the book published, which is Sweet Han, which I would have showed you earlier. Unfortunately, we had a lot of rejections from US publishers, and then I came back, I revised it, and then we went out for another batch of people. We had some people who were interested. We had one publisher that was interested, but I actually felt like they were trying to change what the core of my story was about. And, as somebody who now starting out, hasn't been published, there's that whole thought, okay, even though they seem to want me to change what my story is about, this is my chance to get published. But then I'm the kind of person, if I don't want to do something and my gut is telling me not to do it, I say, okay, maybe I should try another avenue. So I would have spoken to my agent, we had a discussion, and I said, I think I want to self-publish these books because I don't think this publisher is getting what I want to do. And I was very clear on the story that I want to tell, and I didn't want them to try to change my story just to get published. So she was like, okay, she supported me. She said she might try to help me with the audio side of things, and I would just try to self-publish it. And weirdly enough, when I was in the process of self-publishing Sweet Han, and I had just done my cover review, a UK publisher actually reached out to my agent and said, hey, we want you to submit your manuscript to us. And I got a couple offers from there. And yeah, signed with a UK publisher, Piatkus, for the 2 books. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. Here I am, now starting to do my self-publishing journey. And the traditional publisher actually wants the books. So fairly new to being a published author, but I have been writing for a very long time, for years. Creative writing was actually my favorite subject in school. And I used to actually write, put pen to paper, or rather pencil to copybook, and write my stories in a copybook and share it amongst my friends when I was in secondary school. And then they would come back and say, so when are you going to finish the book? We want to read more. And I was like, okay, so people seem to be interested in knowing more about my works and what I'm writing. So that was really the start of where I thought, okay, I could actually publish this and people might want to read my stuff. So I had all these stories in my mind that I just needed to get out. And that's why I decided to actually start writing stuff. And I get inspired by so many different things. So movies, of course, the folklore stories that I grew up hearing about in Trinidad. My grandparents would tell me stories about Jumbies, Guya, and Papagua, and all these kind of, and Duens, all these kind of creepy, traditional tales you hear growing up. So I would have gotten inspiration from that as well. And of course, random scenarios that I might encounter and think, okay, this would be a funny scene to put into my books. And I also get inspired by stuff from my own life as well. And I did put some little scenes in my 2 books so far. Of course, I would have kind of changed up the scenario a little bit, but have the characters go through something similar. And in my books, I like to highlight certain things. So you will always find my characters have a support system at all times. It will either be their friends or family. And in Trinidad, well, we like to party, we like to lime, as we call it here, or hang out. So in my books, that's something that's always going to be a constant theme or feature throughout. So you will see family gatherings, you will see people going out to party or to a fete. Some kind of gathering is always going to be featured in my book because that's like common life for us here. We will find any excuse to make a lime. It could be somebody's birthday, somebody's anniversary, somebody's child got how much of a passes in CXC or Cape or something. So always trying to find an excuse to have a gathering that involves good food, music, and old talking. So I always try to feature those in my books because my characters are Trinidadian like me. It's set in Trinidad where I was born and raised. So I just want to, feature things that other Trinidadians who might be reading or even other Caribbean readers might find relatable and be like, okay, yes, my family does this as well. Another theme that I like to feature in my book would be meddling parents or family members. There's always those family members who trying to matchmake, and that's basically my life. So if you are like a woman of a certain age in the family and you're single, they're going to be, you'll have that uncle or aunt asking, so when you're going to get a boyfriend, or if you're actually in a relationship, they're like, so when are you getting married? When are you all having kids? So I kind of put my characters through the same thing because I figure people who are from the Caribbean will relate to those types of scenarios as well. And setting my stories here was very purposeful. I could have decided to set it in the US or in the UK, possibly, but I think we deserve a space to tell our own stories and in our own voice. Because of course there are people who might not have grown up in our culture or have Caribbean heritage, and they just want to use, I guess, the location as an exotic background for their story. And that's fine if it is you do your research and you're being very respectful and all of that. But I think, we deserve to have people who are a part of the culture, who are living it, who are raised in it. So your characters have that sort of authenticity and are a lot more relatable to readers. Because I remember I did have an experience where somebody who was not from the Caribbean did set one of their books here, and I was reading it and I was like, okay, I was so excited because a lot of times you don't find a lot of romance books set in Trinidad. So I started reading and I realized that the character is coming to Trinidad for to experience our carnival. And the scene is showing the character leaving our airport, and the character is commenting on the fact that they're seeing the beach or the sea from the airport. And I was like, wait a minute, you can't actually see the sea from our airport, right? You have to drive a ways before you see any kind of water. So that kind of jumped out at me, and I know of a lot of other people that they might just gloss it over because to them it's like, okay, you know, this seems like it could be realistic because people tend to think, oh, well, you're from an island. So if you stand at any point to the island, you should see water or beach, right? But that's not actually our reality. And unfortunately, I don't actually get to go to the beach as much as I would like. I wish that was my reality. So all of that is really to say, you know, it's so important for us as Caribbean authors to be able to share our stories and our experiences, you know, because we're the ones who are actually living that reality. And of course, while I, you know, share a bit of my experience with you all, I think it's important for me to recommend and talk about the other Caribbean authors that, you know, I read and I enjoy. So I actually have some books here. So Tracy Batiste is a Caribbean author. She lives in the US. I'm not sure what state she lives in currently, but she's the author of the Jumbie series. So she has the Jumbies, Rise of the Jumbies, and the Jumbie God's Revenge. So it's a middle grade series, and I absolutely love it because I was so excited when I realized that this series existed because I wish I had these books when I was younger, and I saved them. And I said, when my nephew comes of age, I would love for him to, you know, read these books and learn a bit about our folklore and the tales that we grew up hearing, because, and I think Sandra actually mentioned it as well, it's so important to have those stories, you know, carry on from generation to generation. You don't want the tale and that storytelling to be lost because nobody is carrying on that tradition for the younger set that is coming up. So Tracy Batiste, definitely a favorite. I actually got to meet her when she came to Trinidad a couple years ago, and my nephew was there. So we took pictures and she signed books for me and some of her bookmarks. Another author that I would like to recommend to you all, if you know, if you're interested, you might check out is Risley Adams. She's an Antiguan romance author who has written several of my favorite romances. The one that I really enjoy the most is called Birthday Shot. I was totally sold on the book from the opening chapter because there's a character listening to a Kes song. And I'm a fan of Kes and I love soca music. And there's just so much Caribbeanness in the book, even though it's a different island from Trinidad. And I've actually never been to Antigua yet. I have to change that because I'm planning to do some hopping across the islands. But just the whole house party aspect, and there was soca music playing and dance hall and the food and just the overall feeling of the book was so familiar to me. And again, this is why I have to reiterate how important it is for us to, you know, be the ones to get our stories out there. And I would also like to recommend Callie Browning. She's a Bayesian author who wrote The Vanishing Girls. It's a romantic suspense mystery thriller type of story set in 1980s Barbados. And I don't generally read a lot of historical romance or those types of books, but you know, I want to support Caribbean authors who are living in these islands still and actually telling these different kinds of stories. So I said, let me give it a try. And she's actually self-published right now. And I think she's been on like a Oprah listing and all of that. So I said, okay, yes, I want to support the authors from our region. And the book was actually, it was really intriguing and engaging. So I had a lot of fun reading those three authors. So that was a bit about me and my journey with writing thus far.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Can we please can we please give Natalie a huge NG Peltier, please, if we can, purchase the books from these amazing Caribbean writers. And I too have bought an amazing book, and this is Sweet Hand by NG Peltier. Great book.
Yes.
Wonderful book. I will be purchasing more as well from this brilliant author. Great book, thoroughly enjoyed it, very saucy. And I just want to say that you should not feel guilty for reading the book, the Mills and Boon book that you read at your grandmother's house, because I will confess, that I read How Stella Got Her Groove Back by Terry McMillan.
So did
okay?
I.
So I'm not here to judge, I'm just saying. So, and I just want to highlight an important point that you raised in your amazing presentation. And you said, we deserve a space to tell our own stories and in our own voice. And that is incredibly important. And I agree that it's really important for Caribbean writers to write about their own culture. I think that's really, really important. So thank you so much, Natalie, for highlighting that, for telling us your story and sharing your journey. And Sandra Agard, thank you so much as well for telling us and sharing your journey with us as well. We are now going to move on to the audience participation section of the evening. So we are going to invite questions from the floor. I'm going to ask if anyone wants to go first, or what I'll do is I'll go first to warm things up a bit, and I'll look through the chat as well and see if anyone has any questions. So I'll warm things up a bit. So first of all, this is a question for the amazing Sandra Agard. I would like to know, how can we encourage the newer generations to write about their countries of origin, particularly those of us who are diasporans, so those of us who have grown up outside of the region? How can we create communities where we support the writing of younger people?
Okay, yeah, that is a very good question. Thank you. I think what should happen is that people should be encouraged to write about the islands if they want to. I'm first generation, so my feet were firmly based in the Caribbean, in Guyana. But as you go through, sometimes as you go through the generations, it's not so much so. However, I think it's important that we understand our legacies and our histories. And to understand ourselves now, we need to understand our past. And so I think it's really important that we do understand our grandparents' stories, whether they grew up here or in the Caribbean, or in the Caribbean. And so I encourage people, for example, to create story boxes. Story boxes are literally a shoebox. In that shoebox, you will put your family histories, be them photographs, artifacts, something that tells a story. So it's passed down through the generations. And I think that's really important. And obviously to go to the Caribbean, if you can. I mean, it's notoriously expensive to go to the Caribbean. You know, I mean, I've only ever been to Guyana once in '92. We never went. We didn't go as children for lots of various reasons. Nothing, you know, not you know, we would have loved to, but you know what families are like. You know, money. I remember my dad, every time he had to go to bury the times he had to go to bury relations, it was always emergency. And it's a whole heap of money then, and let alone now. But we need to encourage our children to go to the Caribbean, to hear the stories. I mean, I love those, the Jumbie books I have seen, and so I can't wait to read them. I mean, because we grew up with the Greek myths. We grew up with loads of myths from loads of different countries, but the African and Caribbean myths, we are not so sure of. We're learning more of that, and we need to know more of those cultures so that we have them in juxtaposition with the Greek myths, with the Roman myths, with whatever, with the vast European myths. So we have those in conjunction with our own, and it's to encourage our young people to get them to not only think about these cultures, but to write about them, to talk to their elders, to talk to their people, to understand their islands, to understand their histories. And I think it's important that we talk, that we share, and we get people writing and becoming interested in their own histories and stories. I hope that answers it somehow.
Oh, that more than answered it, Sandra. Thank you so much. Everything, I second and agree with that. I'm now going to go to the chat box as I've noticed some questions. Someone has asked, what is the greatest barrier you have experienced along your journey as a writer? And this is to both speakers.
I'll go first if that's
Yes,
okay.
Natalie, please.
Well, I think for me, because I'm thinking back to my experience, my first experience of when, okay, after I actually secured my agent, you think, okay, you know, it's going to get a little easier from here on out, but no, it doesn't. And then she started to actually give me the feedback. Some of the feedback you get, it makes you realize, like, wow, if I could actually give you some of the feedback I got. So people would have said, oh, we have books that are similar to this already on our list, so we'll pass. And the first thing I think is, I'm like, I know what your list has on it because I read a lot of romance, right? So I know what the different publishers are putting out. And I'm like, you don't have any books with Trinidadian characters or Trinidad or set in Trinidad. So what you're saying to me is not accurate at all. So we just feel like these publishers just automatically reject a book if it's not set in the US. And so that has been one of the main barriers for me. And as I would have mentioned, as I was talking about my journey, the fact that they might think, okay, you know, we kind of want your story, but why don't you change it into this? So like how I was speaking about the particular publisher, my book actually reached to the point where, okay, an editor said, I love this book. And she was trying to convince the acquisitions board to purchase it. But then they came back and they said, well, we feel like you need to have a stronger hook, when I thought, okay, my hook was strong enough, you know. And there's just this pressure I feel that they put on Black authors and authors of color that they don't put on white authors, right? Because I read a lot of romance, and there's some things that I'm like, how did this even get published? Does it read as very, you know, I'm like, the quality is not there, but yet because I follow a lot of other Black authors, be it African American or Caribbean authors or from other countries, and authors of color as well online, and you see them sharing their experience saying, well, they were told, well, you know, your story isn't strong enough, or why don't you change your character to this ethnicity? And I'm like, why should I do that?
Yeah.
Why should I have to do that to get my character published? And why are you making it seem like my quality of work, or because I am telling my story in a different way from what you are accustomed to receiving, or the books that you've published previously, that doesn't make my book any less high quality or any less important to get out there. So yeah, those are some of the challenges that, you know, I've had to deal with as well. And you see and you know, they try to give you the feedback in a nice way, but you know exactly what it is they say, right? They're like, well, no, if you change your character to possibly a white character, then maybe, you know, it will be published and readers will want it. But no, you are a publisher. It is your job to make people want the book, right? So don't tell me that you don't know, because this was another feedback I got. They're like, well, we're not quite sure if we know how to position this book to make it break out. But I'm like, that's your job.
Yeah,
you have to find a way. You know, you have to figure it out. So that's just a bit of my experience here,
Yeah.
some of the barriers that I've faced.
Natalie, you've put it there in a nutshell. Absolutely. They're the gatekeepers.
Correct.
They're the gatekeepers, and they guard those gates with their life. And it's just so frustrating because, as you say, they're the ones who have to encourage, to sell, to market your work.
You need to create the demand for the books that you have. So don't tell me you can't do it or you don't know how to do it.
Absolutely. I told, sorry, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say one more thing. When there are bloggers who I follow as well, who do such an amazing job, and they do this for free, of promoting books and the creative ways they do it, because a lot of the stuff that I buy to read is because I saw one of the bloggers that I follow they promoted it, and I'm like, okay, this sounds so interesting. I need to go and read it. So don't tell me you as a whole publisher don't know how to do that.
Absolutely. They've known all along.
Of
And,
course
and
they do.
and things like what's happening with social media, the bloggers, the podcast, whatever, that has caught them off on the foot, really, and they're trying to catch up with that, but still they're the gatekeepers. I was told, I love science fiction and fantasy and all that, and I was told when I told a white editor that I write fantasy and science fiction, she told me, plain where black people don't write that. That's what she told me. You know, and I, you know, rolled my eyes and just, you know. But then we have the wonderful Octavia Butler, who I would recommend. And anybody's ever read her short stories, Bloodchild and other stories, it's one of the most, it's a fantastic range of short stories and utterly brilliant. It's so frustrating, and we have a long history of writing science fiction and science fact. Science fiction and science and fantasy, but yet, according to these people who are the gatekeepers,
we don't write it.
We don't write. You know, we're only supposed to write trauma, which
and
is.
I'm so glad that you said that, because this is a debate that constantly happens on Twitter, where people are like, "Why are there only books about Black pain and blah blah blah?" And I'm like, if you follow the right people, you're going to find stories, so many different stories. There are so many people out there writing books that's not just that, because a lot of the stuff that comes out of the region is literary fiction, right? And a lot of times those stories are very tough to read. Not saying we don't need those stories. We do
need those stories because they're part of our history.
Correct.
They're
but you
part of our
also
legacy. We need those stories. But,
you also need these stories where people like us are getting a happily ever after. And this is why I love romance so much, no matter what the characters are going through. You know, at the end, okay, they're going to be together, they're going to be happy for now, or they're working towards being together or whatever.
Right.
But I'm like, the books exist, they are there. And the thing is, the first book this full-length book that I finished, right, and I haven't even published this one yet, it's still there, I have to revise and everything. It's fantasy, of course there's romance in it, but the main character is a Sukuya and her best friend is like Elijah Bliss, right?
Wow.
So,
gosh,
you're
going in strong, girl.
And I have Papa Boy in there and everything. Of course, I put my little twist it or whatever. So I so want to publish that book. I just need to get it published. I'm still revising it. My agent read it already.
Oh, look at Odin there. He's really for it.
All these years, but
you must publish it because it's so important. We have those story too. When Yemi brought of Children of Blood and Bone, people are, oh, where's this been? You know, where's this been all our lives? It's been there.
Correct.
We've always had these gods and goddesses of African culture, but
you see so many of those types of stories coming out now.
Yes, now, absolutely.
And people acting like
it's just
it's so funny. Publishers act like everything is so brand new, like it was
don't they? Oh my goodness. I mean, like they just get on my nerves. It's very frustrating.
And there's this other side of online community where people are like, oh, I'm over this particular genre, whatever. And I'm like, no, you could say you're over it, but we haven't had a chance to get our stories in there. So no, it's not over until we see it's done, okay?
Absolutely. Now we've got I'm finally reading B.B. Allison's book Amari and the Night Brothers. It's brilliant.
Yes, I've heard of that one.
Oh, good. I mean, it's just so exciting, and to see that these are children of color, Black children who are experiences this. I mean, they I mean, the whole Black Panther movement, that's happened with that. Wakanda Forever. I did World Book Day yesterday at a school, and this little boy, he was dressed as Black Panther. Oh my God, absolutely brilliant. And there was another little girl dressed as Katherine Johnson. Katherine Johnson, the mathematician. It's just wonderful. And we've had all children online dressed as Rocket, Nathan Byron and Ade Amar's book, the Look Up books. You know, finally, children are, you know, we've got Black characters that children are dressing
Mhm.
at. And it's so exciting. It's very exciting. So I'm really happy to see that, because we have stories too, all stories.
Correct. We've always had stories, because, like, you know, I say in my bio, these stories that our grandparents used to tell us and try to creep us out with, and be like, you know, if you go outside at a certain time, X will happen, or if you're coming, if you come home at a certain hour, you need to walk in the house backwards or whatever.
Oh, please. My mother used to creep us out. We used to live in a whole house that creaked and all kinds of things. I had a fireplace, and she would tell us the old man lived there.
Mm-hmm.
And she would make up these stories about the old man.
Yeah.
And it was petrifying.
Yeah, because even just the other day, I was by my cousin, and she's like, you know, people think this older lady who lives in this house, they think she's a sukunya because she literally, and if you see the house there, I'm like, you would think so because of how the house looks, and it's like it's far from the road and kind of in the bush, and I'm like, this is so much fodder for stories, because every time I head up by my cousin up in that specific part of Trinidad, is more like country, so there's like bush and forest, and I'm like, yes, all the ideas are coming to me. That's what I use as my visual.
Yeah, that's a story in the making, man.
So correct. Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes. And I just want to go back to what you would have touched on before, where you said, you know, it's really so important for us to keep those stories going, because we had those stories from my grandparents, but my nephew never met my grandparents, because they would have passed by the time, you know, he was born. So it's kind of up to us, and that's why the Jambi books. And I said when I got these books, I'm like, okay, once he's of age, I'm going to give him this to read, because the books that his parents might buy for him might not be these books, you know. So I find it's like my duty, and I love the fact that he's a reader, so I buy books for him. He gets books for Christmas, he gets books for his birthday. So I take that as my role as the avid reader and writes in the family. I'm like, everybody gets books.
Absolutely. Good.
That's what auntie is going to give you. You're getting books. My cousin's kids get books. Everybody gets books.
Well, we become the gatekeepers. That's what we've got to take control of it. We've got to tell our own stories and create our own pathways. Don't let these people dictate what we should be, because look at life. Look how look at these last 2 years. Look what's happened, and look, you know, the whole Black Lives Matter. I went to an event last night, and they said it's 42 years on Thursday gone from the day of action, and when we marched after the New Cross fire. 42 years, and still that's I mean, a lot of young people do not know about that. And so we need to tell people the history, to show people the history, to show people all our stories in whatever shape or form, be it romance, be it science fiction, be it the trauma stories that came from the slave trade. But I'm also interested in Africa before the Europeans got there, you know, and the Caribbean too, because obviously there were people living in the Caribbean before, you know, whatever happened, what happened to
Christopher
so we
Columbus
need all
did
the
not
stories.
Discover anything.
Exactly.
He rediscovered it. Okay.
And Europe too. I remember I think we've gone off track, but I've just got to tell this story. I remember telling a story about and this woman came up to me and said, I know that story from Poland. Now, the stories, I've always said the stories come from Trinidad, this particular story, but she heard this story in Poland. Now, the story has monkeys in it. Now, I don't think there are wild monkeys in Poland. I don't think they are. But the fact that she heard it in Poland shows how the stories spread. The oral tradition just spreads far and wide. Far and wide. And just goes to show. Goes to show. And
we have a saying here that, you know, no matter where you go, you could go Siberia, you're going to find a Trini.
Yeah, well,
you're going to find a Trini somewhere.
Well, I think this is where we can start with the island and Guyana, because I have to put Guyana. Is that everybody says that about their place? Everybody. But it just shows you, wherever you go, you find us or traces of us. And that shows you, because we sailed the seas long before Columbus decided to discover the West Indies, which he got wrong. We sailed the seas long before all that. It's just that our culture, we didn't tend to write things down as such. It was the oral.
Yeah, it was more oral tradition.
If it was written, it was destroyed, because a lot of things got destroyed. But there is, you know, we do have a sense. I remember writing a poem back in the day, and I got an A+ for it. You know, who's not happy with an A+? I ran down the waving my A+. I remember showing it to my dad, and my dad just said, "Okay, it's nice." And it was a poem, we who have done nothing. So it's about Black people and how we're doomed and all that. And my dad sat me down quietly and gave me a history lesson. I never forget that. So far from we have done nothing, we have done everything. And that's what we need to show people, I think. That's what
correct.
This conversation was amazing. Listen, we can go for a long time about this. So I'm loving it. I'm just mindful of the fact that there are some more questions there, and if anyone has any more, so I'm going to just keep going in terms of the questions I can see in the chat. So if anyone has any questions, that I can see someone has said 3-part question for each panelist. How do you know when a story is finished? Do you find it hard to let the story go out of your hands to the press for publishing? And how do you manage that process of letting go?
That's a very
good question. You want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, you could go ahead. You could go first.
Yeah, it's hard. I wrote a poem years ago called A House, and it's about a house growing. A house we grew up in Islington, and it's about, you know, it's about the history of us growing up in this house as a family with my uncle and his family and all the things. And I wrote this years and years ago. Every time I perform it, I change it, which I know I shouldn't because it's in print. It's hard to let go, but sometimes you have to. Sometimes you've got to let it fly and let it go. It's good to share your work with people who not criticize for the sake of criticism, but give you constructive criticism, who will help you in your journey. I think that's very important. It is hard to let go, but you need to finish, full stop, and move on to the next.
Yes.
Move on, because you've always got ideas. If I'm sure Natalie's like me, I'm great with ideas. They come popping in my head all the time. I've got many beginnings, not many ends. That's hard. It's hard, but you've got to be disciplined, and you've got to know when to let go. And if you're unsure, get somebody to help you in that process. I'm a great believer in being part of a village. Writing is isolated. Writing in isolation a lot of the time. But if you can find a person or a group of people who can help you in that process, to let go, to know when an idea is finished, to discuss an idea, to discuss your story. I think that's really important. Natalie.
Yeah, I agree with you there as well, because even before I ever published anything, I had the book community. I was a part of the community. I was engaging with persons, and I kind of just, I used to write these little free shorts and put it up on my website, so people got a taste of what to expect from me when I actually published longer stuff. But it's important to find the right community as well, because I will never forget this time I joined this writing group, and somebody, I think it was one of the persons there, was white, and she made this comment on my story. I will never forget that. And I'm like, it just kind of threw me off. So that's why I said, find your community, but make sure you find the right community. But also for me, yes, it's hard. It's kind of yes and no in terms of hard to finish, because some stories I know what the end is. I actually know how it's going to end, so I know what I'm working towards. And the thing is, I'm not a heavy plotter like some people who have literally plotted out everything. I kind of just make some bullet points and then the characters just do whatever they want, right? So some stories are easier to finish than others. Like right now, I feel like the second book was a breeze. First one was a little trickier, but book 3 seems to be, I literally feel like I don't know, pulling teeth trying to get this to where I knew I wanted to go. Like I have a general idea of the ending, but it feels like it's so hard to get the middle part out. But at some point I need to get there because I can't just have the story lingering. And I do have other stories where I've started it because I needed to get the scenes out, right? So I'm a Virgo and I have spreadsheets for everything. I have up my projects listing. As soon as the idea comes to me, I jot it down because I don't want to forget it, right? But also like writing standalones is very hard for me. So that's kind of how I escape the whole letting go part a little bit. I usually plot everything with a series in mind. So even if I say, okay, this is going to be 3-book series, this is going to be a 4-book series, I kind of still try to leave it open-ended because romance readers will read a 15-book series if they fall in love with these characters, right? They're not going to stop, because one of my favorite romance authors, she's not from the Caribbean, she's actually from, is it New Zealand? I think it's New Zealand. Nalini Singh, and she writes paranormal romance. I think she's like on book 15 of the series right now, and I'm still reading it. So while it might be tough to finish a book, I feel like I kind of get around that by saying, okay, it's a series, so we know we could kind of leave the ending a little open-ended, because sometimes romance authors might write one couple per book, like a different couple, which is what I kind of do. But then you also follow a couple across several books as well. So their story is unfolding. It's not finished in book 1, eventually, but eventually there has to be an end, right? Because you let's get real here. The story might start to get stale if you just stay with it a little too long, right?
But that's it. Give yourself a deadline.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give yourself a deadline, I think.
Yes.
And I was saying The House, as I read it now, I'm seeing mistakes in it. I'm seeing things I could have done better. And maybe what I need to do is The House revisited. Because I think there's more things that could go into this. This, and it's one of my seminal poems. And but I think give yourself deadlines and know when to quit, I think. And sometimes you've just got to let go. It's like watching your child leave the house for the first time.
Yes.
Go, walk out that door, don't look back. Because there's other ideas, and
correct. And
sometimes
there's so many.
you shouldn't get so precious about it, I think. I know it's your baby or everything, all that, but sometimes I feel as writers we get too precious about it. Really.
And that's where you would have mentioned people to give you constructive criticism. Yes. So I have my beta readers. They're very helpful, and I expect them to give me that constructive criticism. Yes, I don't want you to just tell me everything is perfect. That's not helping me.
No, that's not the point then. It has to be honest and constructive.
Correct.
Yes.
And the people who I do have now, they do give me honest feedback, because they will say, hey, this isn't really working. How about this? And sometimes we do carry over some of our biases into our work as well. So they might be like, hey, you might have written this as an innocent line, but it might offend
Yeah,
X person for
absolutely.
X reason. So that's why
Absolutely.
they're so important. So I'm
Yes,
glad you mentioned that as well, because
yes,
you need to get other eyes on your work because you are too close to it. You're not going to see
that's it.
plot holes and these kind of things. You're not going to pick up on everything. And the person who will be able to tell you, you know, the story, the pacing, the lingering, you need to tighten it up a little bit, all of that
Mm,
too. So yes, beta readers are so important. So,
yeah.
so, so important.
I hope that's answered the question.
Oh, I
Yeah.
think you have given a very thorough answer. Thank you so much to both
Yeah.
of you. I now can see that there's another question. So I'm just going to keep scrolling down as I see the
Mhm.
question. So how do we find our writing voices and publishers when we operate in a sea of white authors and publishers bent towards a European or USA standard?
Hmm.
Shall I go? Or you want to go, Natalie?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good question.
Mm,
I will take it back to the finding your writing community, even
mm,
before you've ever decided to publish anything. But it is tough because, as I would have mentioned, there's those barriers, especially in traditional publishing. And there's also this whole idea that there can only be one, because a
yes.
publisher is going to say, "Oh, we already have a Caribbean author. Though mine is a completely different island, nowhere near Trinidad, nothing to do with um Trinidad in the slightest." Like, no, we have a Caribbean author on our list already. I'm like, but I mean, yes, our islands, we might have certain similar experiences, but culturally, we are not the same. So you can't tell me you have one Caribbean writer already and you're good. You're good there, you know? So I'm not gonna lie to you, it is very difficult. And this is kind of why I chose to go the self-publishing route. So you do
Yeah.
have more
Yeah.
control there.
Mm,
So there's pros and cons, but the thing is, you literally have to do everything
yeah.
yourself, right? So when I decided to go that route, I reached out to other authors who were already in the self-publishing game for a long time. And even though they gave me advice, I still had trial and errors along the way.
Mm,
And then it's costly as well because you have to pay for everything. A traditional publisher will pay for everything. Um, but then they have a lot of control.
mm,
So it's kind of tough. It's kind of tough. I'm not going to lie to you. It's pretty tough finding your voice there and the right publisher who's going to get what it is, or editor rather, who's going to get what it is that you want to achieve, and really work with you and not try to overtake or change what the
or
core of your
change.
story is.
Yeah.
So there's some people who get lucky, and then there are people who share their horror stories about things that they had to go through, and it's like, oh my God, I don't want to have to deal with this. So if you have to go into the mindset of, if you're trying to get traditionally published, just understand it's very hard out there.
Yeah.
It's very rough. It's a tough thing.
Mm,
But there are options. There are options. Self-publishing is one of the main options if it is you want to have more control over what it is you are putting out there. Because publishing is very white. It still is. Even though after the whole Black Lives Matter, they put out all these statements. Yes, we're going to acquire X
mm,
amount of whatever. And
mm,
how much of a year later, it's like, what have you actually done instead of
mm.
just all this lip service? Where's the actual action? Where's the proof that you decided to, give us a chance? Kind
Absolutely.
of thing.
And
So,
that's what it's about. It's about giving a chance and not, I mean, I call it the Highlander effect, that anybody remembers those films, there can only be one,
yeah, there can only be one.
it's just so frustrating. There can only be one of everything. I mean, Andrea Levy, she has, she worked at Small Island, but would you believe she was literally, her and her agent were down to one of the last publishers before they looked at that book.
Mhm.
And things she was told, things like, well, how many Black people read? Only Black people would read this in this country. How many Black people
My
read?
God. Oh my
And now
God.
we know that Small Island is a classic. I mean, there's a play. It's still doing the rounds. It's now taught in schools. It's just so frustrating. So how many small islands have there been that have just gone by the wayside because not everybody has the the energy to do the self-publishing, because
Correct.
yeah, you can publish the book, but it's the marketing. You can have all
Yep.
those boxes of books that you
Yep,
spent
yep,
so
yep.
much money sitting in your house.
It takes
It
a lot of
takes
work.
a lot
Takes a
of
lot of work,
courage.
and yeah.
Yeah. But we don't want to put you off. I mean, if you think you go for it, you're going to do it, go for it, because I think that's a lot of the people were put off by it. That's why when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, and the whole Black culture scene was so vibrant and so much was happening, and it was we were doing it ourselves. We did it ourselves. I mean, we published a book called Times Like These, a series of poetry and short story. We established our own printing press, a Batala press. Yeah, for a while the books were sitting, in our houses. But when we went to readings, we took some, and people bought it. And now I don't think there are any copies left now, unless you've got copies of your own as such. But you do it yourself, and things are a lot better. There's a lot more out there to do it yourself, and the publishers, like it or not, they are waking up to the fact that all this creativity is going on, and that people are doing it themselves, like it or not, with or without their help.
Correct.
So I would advise you, find your community, and there's lots of small independent presses. I mean, we tend to head for the big ones. There's lots of small independent ones as well. So that's something you could look for. Competitions are another good way of getting your work out there. And I would advise you to find a creative writing workshop or something that encourages you. I mean, when I used to do creative writing workshops, when I used to work at Southwark Libraries, I had the most terrible stories of people coming with me who had been hurt so terrible by the tutor of the class, that their confidence had been shattered, and I think that I think that's so cruel to do that to somebody, to put somebody down for the sake of what? Just I don't know. But anyway, but find your people, find your community.
And I would also add, if you're trying to go the traditional published way, what I did for years before I published anything, I looked into the agents and the editors, and you make sure and you look at what they are representing.
Yes.
Right? Who are they representing? Is it a sea of white books alone? Then okay, I'm not gonna go for that person. They're not gonna do anything for me. So while it's hard, you just and just try until, if it is you think you reach your breaking point and you want to stop. Okay, because I was at the point where I'm like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. And then my agent was like the one person that responded and said, hey, are you still looking for representation? Do you want to get on the call? And the first thing she said to me was she was happy that it was not set in the US, and my agent is a white woman who lives in the US, right? And she actually said that. She's like, that's what she loved about the book, the fact that it was set in Trinidad, it was set in a different location, it wasn't the US. And she was like, yeah, while she was reading, it made her want to eat Trini food and listen to soca. I'm like, yes. So yeah, you have to do your research too. You have to. I was
going to say, do your homework. Absolutely.
Do your research, because even though she was on my list of agents, I actually reached out to her current clients, and I was like, how is it working with Lauren? And I was following her for a while before I even entered that contest where she liked my work, and I was able to send her a couple of my pages for her to read. Yeah, so check out the agents, see what they're representing. That will tell you a lot. Look at the publishers, see the books that they're acquiring. That will tell you, hey, maybe these people are for me, or no, they're not for me. So your research is very important.
Absolutely.
Very important.
I thoroughly agree with that. Thoroughly agree with that.
Thank you for those answers. Very insightful, and it's given, I'm sure, a lot of us, including me, things to think about. I had another question. Do students study these novels? So the novels that you've mentioned, particularly Natalie, you gave us some examples of books we could read. Do students study these novels or these books in Caribbean schools? Is the curriculum balanced with European writers and Caribbean writers?
Well, I could tell you that I don't think they study those books in school. I mean, I know when I was in school, we did have some Caribbean authors. So we would have read V.S. Naipaul, we did A Brighter Sun, Green Days by the River. So there are some, but it's always kind of like the same genre. They just stick to the same type of literary fiction, and they don't
Walcott.
give you like
Mhm.
a variety in terms of what they have the students study. So it's still kind of, pigeonholed into that specific genre. So it's not like, at least that was my time. I don't know if it's changed now, because I would have loved to be reading a fantasy set in the Caribbean or something like that. But in my day, that wasn't really the case. It was a specific genre only that we had for literature.
Yeah, I mean, I think now I know that they're doing over here in Britain, they're doing things like a Chevy, Things for a Part. They're doing The Lonely Londoners Selvin. They're doing Andrew Levy. I think some schools are even doing Bernadine's book, Girl, Woman, Other. But it's still, I mean, they've many schools have now not doing Of Mice and Men, which I did when I was at school, and I went to school centuries ago. And I think that's out. They're still, I think they've taken out Kill a Mockingbird, I think, happily. But it's still, I think they're doing Noughts and Crosses. I think some schools are doing Mallory Blackman's Noughts, but it's still very far and few between. And obviously John Agard's poetry, Half Garth, was was a popular one, and some of Grace Nichols' poetry. But it's Benjamin Zephaniah poetry and his Windrush Trials, I know, was on the curriculum. But it's so much more. I did no literature when I was at school. It was me bringing in James Baldwin. I remember I wanted, when I was doing my O-levels, I had to do an oral paper, an oral presentation. And I asked my teacher, could I read from Go Tell It on the Mountain? And she said yes, and I did, which was, so it was us bringing in the literature. It was definitely not on the curriculum, but things have changed a lot since then. And when I was growing up, there was a lot of Black American. There was hardly any Caribbean, but we did Brathwaite and Walcott. We did it ourselves because we set out to search for our literature because we were young, gifted, and so Black. So we looked out for ourselves what literature was out there. But it has changed a lot, and I'm glad of that. Things. I mean, we've got so much literature for young people now. It's so exciting. You still go into a bookshop and you're just inundated with books about frogs and princesses and all kinds of manner of things. And you search high and low for the black or the brown or anything other there, and you're still searching for that. I mean, when I was at the libraries, we made a massive effort to get in a lot of different books from all over the world for people to read, and our book groups reflected that. So things have changed, and it's a lot better now. But how long is this piece of string? Things could be even more better if people just gave it a chance. I mean, look what's happening in America with all the what's happening. As soon as you want to do some, they're getting rid of a lot of the literature. It's frightening what's happening there with what they're doing to the books, taking out books that had been studied and read for ages and ages, but yeah, you could find something to say about everything. I mean, we would be reading nothing. If you know, it's just so frightening what's happening over there, and I just wish people would stop and read the book. A lot of people haven't even read the book. You know, they're just, I don't know, making these assumptions, and what they're doing for their children, because I know the children, young people want to read these books. You know, they're not giving the young person and the child a say in the matter, and they do have opinions. They do have opinions. I remember when I was in the libraries, the Harry Potter books, which I know a lot of people have issues with, even back then. But it was a child in the playground who showed me that book. She said, "Sandra, you've got to read this book." And she put it in my hand. She put it in my hand, and I never forget that. You know, so and look at the phenomenon that became. But we need to do so much more, I think. Not we, because we're doing it, but you know, the powers that be need to be aware of what is happening, and to be fair, and to have balance, rather than being inundated with the same old all the time.
Yeah, that is so true, because I just go back to romance publishing, where they tell you, oh, we already have this, but there are a million white cowboy books out there, and there are more coming out. So how can you
About
tell me?
frogs.
So how can you say, oh no, we're good over here, we don't need any more of these, but yet you're just putting out the same books, and so just
it's
give us a
a
chance.
fair. I don't know what is it. A fair? Is it? I don't know what it is. It's
It
very
probably
frustrating.
is, because people, and I see all these comments online, because there's just been what it seems to them like an influx of books that are not white. People are like, oh, if you're not of a certain ethnicity, they're probably not even going to look at your book. And I'm like, this is a white person saying this, and I'm like, are you serious? Are you for real right now? But that is so not the case.
I know we need a holistic approach. We need everything so we can have a balance, so it's all fair and just. I hope I'm not being idealistic, but you know, you just want to give people choice. You just want people choice.
And people want to see themselves in literature, you know?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Look at those children yesterday, Katherine Johnson, because I couldn't work out who she was. And I've written a book about Katherine Johnson. When she said Katherine Johnson, it fell off my chair. Unbelievable. And then when I looked at it, I said, of course she is. But and you can't be what you can't see. You know, you can't be what you can't see. We need choice. We need range. We need it to be a fair, a level playing field, which it's never been. Which it's never been. And we're all working in our own little corners, doing our own little bits, and fighting for a just society. When they've never been just. You know, it's just beggars belief.
I definitely agree, and there's so much that I can pull from this conversation. I think fundamentally it is about self-determination and seeing yourself in literature, and then knowing yourself more and more. And I just wanted to say that I would have loved to have read Caribbean supernatural folklore when I was a teenager. So I'm so excited to read those books that Natalie mentioned. I would have loved to have read books about, Jumbie and Oleg and all of that. To this day, when I'm at home, if something falls in a way that is unexplainable, if something falls onto the floor, I'm like, it's a Jumbie. To this day.
Correct. And there's a thing people say here, sometimes you go to sleep and you wake up and there's a random strange bruise on you, and here there's like, oh, that was a sukunya that came to you and tried to suck your blood or whatever.
Honestly, thank you.
I mean,
I'm never sleeping again.
It seems so ridiculous, but yet in the back of your mind, you're like, what if?
Absolutely.
You just don't know, right? You don't know.
But that makes us part of something, that we are part of a story. that we're part of this world, because that's what it makes you feel. Because if you're not seeing yourself, you're not part of anything, are you? You're some loose cannon, loose something floating in the universe, and you don't belong. Because that's what it gives you, that sense of not belonging anywhere, not being a part of something. And we need to be grounded. And I think that's part of why they do that to us, that, you know, we are not seen as grounded, that we are not seen as people, not seen as human almost, that we have no history. That's why I could write that poem and my teacher gave me an A+ for this poem, where, you know, we've invented nothing, we've done nothing, we're all doom and gloom, until my father said, well, actually, Sandra, no, let me give you a history lesson. Let me tell you about what we have done as a people. We might have, our history might have been broken up and dismantled and fragmented. And now we're, you know, we're searching for who we are as a people, you know, be it as writers, be it as dancers, be it as photographers, be it as anything. But the thing, we are still here, and that's the thing. Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise, greatest poem ever, because it says what's on the tin. Despite what you do to us, we still rise. So bring it on. Come on, bring it on. Come on. You know, dare I say, show us your worst, because they always do. They always show us the worst, and they do us the worst. The Emma Tills of this world, the Joyce Flores of this world. And those ones have been in the public eye, let alone here in Britain. I mean, my dad told us this story. Have you ever, I mean, those of from Britain here, have you ever tried to get a story about what it was like growing up in this, being here in the 60s from your parents? They don't tell you. It's the best kept secret, because it was pure, it was awful. They came here when they were so young, to countries that they only knew about in books. It was not like how they thought it would be. And they don't tell you. They don't tell you. I could have been an only child, because my dad, coming home from, he was into maths. My dad loved maths, so he went to evening classes to do maths. My dad was a trained accountant. I learned that when he passed. I didn't know that when he was, anyway. He was coming home after a class, and he was chased down the road by skinheads, and had to hide behind a wall. So I would not have had my two younger sisters. I would have been the only child growing up here. And it's just rubbish. And so, I know that story, but you try to get them to tell you anything while it was growing up, like, you know, being here. It's so fun. It's just so, it makes you so angry. And I always said, I wish I was here when they were growing up, but obviously I couldn't be.
Yeah.
But we knew how these people stay. Our parents didn't. They thought they were coming to some, I don't know, land of milk and honey. And they left the Caribbean. In my mum's case, she didn't go back until after 60 years.
Wow.
And they left, and what Britain did, they drained the Caribbean of all that, of the youth. And many of them were only coming for the 5 years and stayed, in my mum's case, 60 plus, died here eventually. Very frustrating. Yeah, we could be angry, and we are angry, some of us, but we could be more angry, but still we rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. No matter what you do with us, still we rise. And that is what they don't like. That is the fear.
I'm so sorry to have to.
Yes, sorry.
Interject, Sandra. No, I realise that, you know. No, I completely. This is a conversation that, you know, could go on for so long. I'm just mindful of the time. I think we'll only have time for one more question. I can see a question in the chat, and it's for. So, Natalie, have you considered a political themed book? And Sandra, have you considered a romance themed novel or frogs? So I think it's a kind of a swap in a way. So Natalie, have you considered a political themed book? And Sandra, have you considered a romance themed novel?
That's an interesting question. And I will say, by the very nature of what I write, it's already political. It's a romance book, but it's still political, right? Because I feature um, characters who are not always represented in
Mm.
literature. I also have queer characters in my book. The lead of my first book is actually a bisexual Black man. So I think I already have political themes in my books, even though it is a romance. And that's actually quite typical for romance books. People have an idea of what they think a romance novel is, but romance is so many things. Yes, these two people, it's about people going on a journey and falling in love and having happily ever after, but it's already political.
I agree. I agree with you thoroughly because you're making a statement. You're showing that people are everything and everything. Yeah, so I thoroughly agree with you. It depends what you mean by romance. I think my work is. I'm not a Mills and Boons. I don't think I'm a Mills and Boons type person that way. But I remember reading growing up. I don't know if anybody remembers them. Probably if you're of an age. The Sue Barton, which is a nurse's book, and they had a bit of romance going on in there. I remember growing up reading those like avidly. But I'm not sure. Yes and no, because I think my stories, especially when because I of late I've been writing children's books, but in my early life as a poet, they were full of, I would think, a kind of romance. But it depends. It's hard. It's hard to be that clear cut, because I feel my stories are full of a romance. I feel, I mean, that my latest one, The Lion Keeper, is about this boy who's taken from Africa to look after the lions at the Tower of London, because before there was London Zoo, the animals which were given by the king was kept in the Tower of London, because that was the strongest place to put lions and polar bears and things like that. And the boy has a love for his family, a love for the home that was taken from him, so much so that he decides that he is going to try and run away. And the story is, does he succeed? Does he manage to do that, and run away and to return to Africa? You could say that that is a very romanticized idea, because a lot of those enslaved people who did manage to get away, a lot of them didn't return. Some of them did try. We know of the Nova Scotia people who went back and what happened to them and so forth. So is that, could be deemed romance, or is it romance between a man and woman, two men, what are you thinking? What is romance? And people have this idea of what romance is. So I think there's a lot of romance in my stories anyway, if you want to have that definition. I hope. I hope, and I hope like Harriet, the book on Harriet Tubman, why does she escapes once? She could have stayed up in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, but she returns 13 times. Why? Because she had a love of her people, and she felt she had a duty to go back, yes, to save her family to begin with, her own family, but she went back again and again she had a price on her head. She couldn't read or write. There was no sat nav. She did it all by this. She learnt the roots in her head, because she had a commitment. She had a love of her people, to rescue as many people as she could from the evils that the slave trade was inflicting on them. So yeah, so I think that the love, the romance, I think it's in all our books, in every book. I mean, when you read Rockets, about Rockets and her looking up, I don't know if anybody look up, please guess it. Dapo Adelello has done the illustrations, and it's written by Nathan Byron. It's a fantastic children's book. And on Instagram at the moment, there's a lovely picture that Dapo drew about the mother combing Rocket's hair. And if you remember how your mother used to comb your hair. Who hasn't got that story amongst us? It is, when I saw that the first time, I cried. It is the most sublime. It just says it all. Because Rocket sings, she's vexed because she want to go out and play, and her mother's quietly combing her hair. It's sublime. Somebody, a mother and daughter, has reenacted that picture, and it's on Instagram. It's just beautiful. It's beautiful, and that's what I just said. You can't be what you can't see. And to me, that picture just sums it up. And that photo, that somebody has gone to all that trouble to do that because she's seen it in that book that Dapo and Nathan put together, and it's a classic. It's a picture book. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. I would have urged, even if you got no children in your life, just get it and have it in your house, because it's just sublime. And that for me sums it up. Rocket, the spirit of Rocket. She is us.
Thank you so much for that. Can we just give, again, Natalie and Sandra Agard a huge clap for their time this afternoon and for their...
Thank you, Effia.
Thank you so,
I mean,
so
she
much.
tried to tie us down. And
you know we could keep talking.
Thank you very much. I
You've
really
given us a lot
appreciate
to
you.
talk about. Thank you so much. And so I'm now going to announce that it's the end of the event. I would like to thank all the panelists, both of our brilliant speakers, for so kindly agreeing to speak on the panel this evening. I'd like to thank the Caribbean Links team for all their help. I do not do this by myself. There are amazing people who help me behind the scenes. One of them is here this evening. Shout out to Stacey. Thank you so much. And the others are of great help, have been of great help to me. So I'd like to thank them all for their help, participation, support, and incredible hard work. Finally, I would like to thank all of the guests, all of you for tuning in. Thank you so much for choosing to spend some of your Saturday afternoon with us. We really appreciate you. And we will be having our next event, which will be our very, very first in-person event. And we'll let you know about that. Yes, we'll be letting you know about that and keeping you up to date with that. We would ask you to please follow Caribbean Links on Instagram and Twitter at Links Caribbean. And please do subscribe to our Caribbean Links YouTube channel. If you just type in Caribbean Links on YouTube, our past virtual event should come up. Again, as I was saying, we are going to be having our first in-person event this year, later on this year. We are hoping that it will be a summer party. So we are hoping that people will come, dance up themselves, you know, have some fun, wind up yourself, have some fun, and enjoy a lovely evening. And we will keep you up to date about all of that and give you more information in due course. Once again, I want to say thank you so much to all of you for coming. It's been brilliant. Thank you all so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. And I hope that I'll be able to perhaps post on our social media the books that Natalie and Sandra Agard have recommended, and also post some of their literature as well. Again, as I said, I have got my copy of Sweet Hand by N.G. Peltier. Have you?
So, no, I'm going to get it though.
So thank you all so much, and have a lovely evening, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Thea. Thank you for being a wonderful host. Thank you.
Indeed.
And Natalie, thank you.
Thank you
Wonderful.
so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Beautiful.